Oh, you.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Sopranos podcast. This is a very special episode today.
It already is.
It's extremely special. I'm your host, Chris D'Amato. You've heard from me 13 episodes now. I'm here with our usuals,
Paul Mancini.
And Jordan Hugh.
but we also have a very special person joining us today. This person has been with the podcast behind the scenes for a long time now, and in my opinion is one of the many reasons the podcast stuck together and functioned as well as it did. So we wanted this person to join us for this retrospective, and this person is my wife, Lily D'Amato. How are you, Lily?
Hi everyone, I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah,
It's so cool we got Lily on the podcast. Lily's like one of our favorite people, so it's just cool that she joined us for one of these.
Aw, shucks,
Yeah,
guys.
finally.
So yeah, Lily is here. Lily, I think a good way I want to start this. Okay, I'll start this off properly by explaining what it is to the audience that we're doing. This is our season 1 retrospective. This is a place for us to just kind of have a very casual conversation about season 1 of The Sopranos in its totality. We're going to give you some favorites, our top 3 in various different categories, music choices, characters, episodes. And we're also just going to touch down on things that we took away from the season, how we rate the season overall as one big story. It's going to be great. We're going to have a lot of fun with this one.
And I think also a little bit of our story, maybe how we came about this podcast, and just a little bit of, you get to go backstage with us this episode.
Exactly. It's an all-around hootenanny of behind-the-scenes fun and Sopranos fun.
A jamboree, one might say.
Ooh, a jamboree.
A veritable cornucopia, if you will.
Yes. Ballyhoo.
So, here we are, guys. I think the first thing I want to do, just because this is Lily's first time joining the podcast, is on the introduction episode, we all kind of gave our first impression, first moment, first connection to The Sopranos. So to start us off, I just want to get Lily on board, and anybody we bring into this podcast. I think this is a great first question. What was your first exposure, experience, memory, whatever? What drew you to The Sopranos?
Oh, okay. So, senior year of college, Chris and I started hanging out, and I think a prerequisite of spending any time with Chris D'Amato is you have to see The Sopranos. So this was a very casual hanging out, nothing too crazy or romantic between us yet.
So this was not Sopranos and chill. This was
not Sopranos and chill. No, it wasn't. It was mostly just Sopranos.
I would never mussy up The Sopranos with any chill.
All right.
And then we graduated, and Chris and I kind of had this interesting on again, off again for a few months.
And we'll talk about that in a different podcast.
And so I would say maybe 8 months or even a year later, we're finally together. We're an official couple, and Chris says, we need to re-up. You need to start watching. We'd only seen season 1. So rather than rewatching season 1, Chris drew out an entire family tree for me to show exactly how everybody connected and where were their storylines. And it ended up helping out a lot. And so we started back up again with season 2 and ended up watching the same thing, the whole shebang. So, a lot of my relationship with Chris D'Amato is really wrapped up in The Sopranos. But anybody who knows Chris will know that that's kind of everyone's relationship with Chris.
Yep.
It's such an important thing to him.
Thank you.
It's this baseline of, to be Chris D'Amato's friend, you really gotta talk Sopranos. You gotta know what you're talking about. And if you don't, he will be the one to watch every single episode with you.
I will do it, and I've done it with many friends, watched every single episode. I want the listeners to know, though, that when it comes to Lily, I did have to pay the iron price to get through The Sopranos, and I watched every single episode of Sex and the City.
He did, and we would go episode by episode.
My God.
And what was really interesting about watching them together is that you really realize that both Tony Soprano and Carrie Bradshaw are anti-heroes of their own story. And it ended up being really interesting.
I like that. Also, from a historical perspective, those shows used to air together. Mm-hmm. So that kind of must have been interesting. It's just kind of like a, hey, what was it at the turn of the millennium, there?
Right.
I'm a little jealous because Chris hasn't made a family tree for me in years.
I'll give you a family tree today, Paul. So, The Sopranos, Season 1. What a fucking season of television, guys.
Wow.
I've heard it described by people close to me as maybe a perfect season. A lot of people, we're not going to do spoilers even in the retrospective, the casual retrospective, but a lot of people say season 1 is their favorite and the best. Hard to argue. My favorite season is actually not 1, but 1 might be as close to perfect as one gets for a television season for the most part. At least a 9 out of 10, if not a 10.
I agree. What I actually like particularly about season 1 is that it is kind of contained. Other than the issue of whether or not Pussy is working with the government, everything is resolved pretty much by the end of the first season. You could just watch season 1 and stop and feel fulfilled and have a cathartic experience.
And on that note, Jordan, I would even go further and say that if it never caught on with the public and they never approved a season 2, it still would have been regarded as one of the greatest. Like, it would be one of these shows. I don't know. I think Sopranos is better than Firefly, so don't get mad at me. It would be like one of these Firefly shows that would have a devoted cult following of people that are like, this is one of the greatest things ever. You have to watch this.
Yeah, Freaks and Geeks is one of those too, and it never actually ended.
I agree. I would even count Twin Peaks, which was just a 2-season show, but similar thing, or even Deadwood, which was a 3-season and done that kind of had cult fans burning the candles bright for years after.
I think that one of the among many properties, I don't think there's really a false note anywhere in the first season, and I also think that it's one of those first seasons, not unlike Dexter, where it really sets a high watermark at the outset. And one of the smart things, I know we don't want to do spoilers, one of the things that they did with season 2 that is smart is they didn't try to do season 1 over again. Because they knew they couldn't. They couldn't just do stuff with Livia again that worked similarly without it being repetitive. They couldn't have the same relationship with Tony and Uncle Junior. So actually, I think one of the things that informed season 2 being so wonderful and the show going forward is that they always tried to do different things. And one of the reasons that they had to was because what they had set up in the first season was, I think, and still think today, was very hard to top.
I agree. I also think it's evident in Sopranos season 1 that there is a structure, but there is not necessarily a formula that even really can be repeated in an effective way. We have seen countless shows, countless prestige dramas in particular, where each season is basically a rehash of the season that came before it. Who's the new bad guy? How do our characters respond to this bad guy? Someone important dies, etc., etc. That's kind of just checking off the boxes. Again, no spoilers, but when we get to season 2, 3, 4 of The Sopranos, etc., they're not just going to keep repeating themselves in this way. In fact, they'll do some things that are really divergent and make the fan base a little bit divisive about certain directions the show goes in.
Yeah. They never play it safe. They never will play it safe. This first season, in and of itself, wasn't safe, but it hit. It was lightning in a bottle, but they do not rest on those laurels going forward. Thoughts on season 1 as a whole, Lily?
Oh, I agree with your sentiments. It's really something special. You really get a good amount of every character, so that it's very satisfying that way. But we know that there's more to come as well, which is excellent.
That's a good point you bring up, Lily. It's very balanced. It's obviously Tony Soprano's show. He's obviously our main character. It's not something like Oz, where you're kind of spending equal time with everybody. But short of Tony being the centerpiece, it feels balanced. Like you get just the right amount of all the other characters. You get the right amount of Carmela, the right amount of Melfi, the right amount of Livia. Sometimes Livia looms large over this season, obviously. Many episodes, she's in one scene. Really amazing. What a presence. Nancy Marchand. We're going to get into characters and performances, but, when I think of season 1 in its place as a whole, I think of Livia.
I absolutely do. Another thing about this season is that it seems to me that everything is perfectly placed. Here's an example. I believe in episode 3, Tony is waiting in Melfi's waiting room, obviously, and he's dressed in a suit, and he's reading the paper, and he sees the painting. And
this is the barn painting, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Denial, anger, acceptance.
And he starts talking quite confidently in the session that follows about what the painting means. One of my favorite lines from the season is, "Hey asshole, we're from Harvard, and what do you think of this spooky, depressing barn and this rotted out tree?" Notice that isn't in the first episode, it's not in the second episode, it's in the third episode, which is where Tony has become at least a bit more comfortable in this framework, more comfortable in the room with Melfi, to express that in that way. everything is placed, I think, in the right spot for the trajectory and these characters' development. It's not until episode 11, months into therapy, when Tony is confronted with this question of whether or not Pussy Bompensero is a traitor, and now his expertise and understanding of psychological deconstruction has gone even deeper. And that's where it needs to be for that story to be ratcheted up to that 11th decibel of tension. So all these points and these value differences of where things are placed are not placed frivolously. They're done smartly and surgically, and it all adds up to a season. Again, I don't think a false note anywhere.
Therapy is such an important part of this season, too. The show starts with Tony in Melfi's waiting room and his relationship with Melfi. Let's talk about Tony in these various roles. Tony has a lot of different... He's kind of the pinwheel in the center. He's a lot of different... Let's talk about Tony and Melfi, their relationship throughout the season, where it starts, where it ends up, what happens in the middle, how they really feel about each other. It's a complex relationship. It's an interesting relationship. We know when we see a gangster drama, we're going to see a gangster and his wife. We know we're going to see the gangster and his kids. We know we're going to see the gangster and his other gangsters. But a gangster and his therapist, now that's where the show really sparkles in a unique way. Let's talk about Tony and Melfi.
So I think The Sopranos, I don't know if it intended to do this, but it's actually a ringing endorsement for therapy. I think... I hope no one will take this unkindly. I think men have a hard time with therapy, maybe especially Italian men. And this just goes outside of being anyhow, involved with organized crime, but it's very emasculating to see a therapist occasionally. I actually think everyone should be in therapy to some degree. I think therapy is wonderful, but I always remember men like my dad or like my grandfather who'd be like, you're essentially like a weakling somehow if you go to see a therapist, like you're a pussy, you're a mental midget, right? Is the idea.
I've been in therapy and I have a little bit of that reaction. My brain knows better, and but that first gut reaction when somebody tells me, "Oh, I'm going to therapy," it's like, "Oh, why are you telling me that?"
I know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's weird.
I remember even mentioning like maybe going to see a therapist to my mother. I've since not gone, by the way. I would like to go, but she said you don't need therapy. You just need good friends. And I said, that's not really the same thing, is it? So there is therapy. Going to see a therapist is still stigmatized decades after The Sopranos. And this show, I think, opened the door to showing people like, hey, you can do some really amazing things in therapy. It's just nice to have that.
That's an amazing point. You just need good friends. Imagine if Tony just kept going to his friends. Who are your friends? Who are your family? Not everybody's blessed to have insightful friends who know how to walk you through something. And when you do, even if you do, there's still a little in it, and it's not their responsibility to help you that way, the way a therapist does. But imagine if Tony opened up to Paulie or Sil.
Yeah, like what the fuck is Paulie Walnuts gonna do for your panic attacks?
Yeah, it's gonna be some kind of suck it up, right? Get over it.
Right.
But
Silvio admits as much in the last episode. It would be better if we could admit to each other these were stressful times. It'll never happen. That's not part of their culture, and it's one of the things that makes Melfi continually fascinating as a character is that she doesn't quite fit in this world. There are ways in which she has these commonalities, but if this show is allowed to have a conscience, I'm not sure that it does, she's the closest thing. So I think that is continually fascinating, and it's a very interesting relationship, again, that I think is hard to top after this season, wherein he meets her, he's dealing with these cultural ideas that are old school, backwards, whatever, that aren't allowing him to open up as much, but she's starting to help him. She's helping him understand a number of things, and as if those more ethereal qualities weren't clear enough, by the end, I think she has saved him literally.
I agree. So in terms of Tony and Melfi's relationship, bringing it back to your point, Chris, I think it's arguably the most fascinating relationship on the show. It has its own gorgeous arc that takes some interesting turns. I don't know that we know initially when Tony first walks into the office how much he is attracted to this woman. We certainly know by the early to mid part of the season that he's fallen quite in love with her. Not just a sexual infatuation, but something deeper and more beyond that. And that would be one thing, but I think what the show does, because the writing is so clever and deep and has wonderful subtext, is that he's more than just a patient to her as well. I don't know that she is in love with him, but this is someone she often thinks about. This is someone that has, I will use the word taken up a piece of her heart, not necessarily to mean romantic love, but Tony has become someone she cares about deeply beyond the relationship of doctor and patient by the end of the season.
I would argue that Tony's not in love with her. I just don't know that he's ever met a woman or spent any time with a woman like her, right? You're soft like a mandolin, he says, right? Every single woman, Meadow included, is very brazen, very harsh, will tell you like it is with no consideration of your feelings. And Tony doesn't know what to do with that. Right? But have some kind of lust or curiosity about that. And I think it's almost similar for Melfi. She's never met anybody like him. And it's a part of her, culture, I guess, that she hasn't tapped into, especially as we see how her family reacts to that side of being Italian.
Yes.
And so it's almost that, the way a woman would latch on to the bad boy, but not really be in love with them or even have more of nothing real more than a curiosity of what would it be like to be a part of that. And we definitely see her wrestle with that later on in the season. And I will respect the no spoilers series, rather, not season. And like I said, I'll respect no spoilers, but she has that curiosity for good, and so much so that she can't even hold it in when it comes up with her family, right? Oh, you should see my patient. I don't remember the direct quote.
You wouldn't want to say Guinea in front of him. I have a patient you wouldn't want to say.
She couldn't wait to get that out, and then realizes immediately what a bad idea it was as a professional, and as a woman in front of her family, knowing how they would react to that, right? It was just a bad idea. So this almost turns into her own little secret too, which is also very intriguing. So you're dealing with these two people who maybe think they're feeling love, but it's not. It's other emotions, but especially Tony has no toolbox. And I think you'll hear me say this a bunch throughout this podcast episode, but Tony doesn't have the tools in his toolbox to deal with that feeling or deal with a woman like that. So much so that he conjures up his own, right? In Isabella.
Wow.
So for you don't think that Tony's feeling towards Melfi can constitute genuine love? Or actually, maybe the more interesting question for you, Lily, specifically, is from a woman's perspective, what are Melfi's feelings for Tony as a man?
Sure. We'll start with Tony as love. I mean, who am I to say who's in love, who's not? I just think that, especially in season 1, it's so one-sided, right? Think about a relationship of a patient to their therapist. He's not asking her, he doesn't know anything about her, other than she's soft, she's nice to him, right? She's
Italian.
She's Italian. She'll call him out, but not in a way that makes him feel threatened. And actually, sometimes she does, right? Especially when she brings up the fact that, hey, your mom put a hit out on you, and you should probably be, opened up to that. But she doesn't take that sledgehammer point of view. But he doesn't know anything about her. How can he love her?
He mentions in that scene where he's saying, I love you, one of his justifications for it is, I think about you all the time, I dream about you. But the imagery of the dreams doesn't support his point, it supports Lily's, because he's projecting onto her the image that he wants. He doesn't know her.
Right.
Well, there's a clue in the episode Pax Soprano with Tony's quote. This psychiatry shit. Apparently what you're feeling is not what you're feeling, and what you're not feeling is your real agenda. That's very true. At least in the context of this show, that there's a good deal of projection going on here. Self-projection and projection of inner desires onto the other. It's a very complex and fascinating relationship.
Yeah. And then to your other point, Jordan, Melfi with Tony, I think it's that danger. She's never had anybody in her chair like him. It's not only titillating to her as a woman, but I think as a psychiatrist and as somebody who, this is a whole new brand of research she's never had. And everybody, I hope this isn't too spoilers, or, I'll make a clean cut so you can cut this out, throughout the series, but starts with her ex-husband, says that there's no hope here. You know, so it's almost like she's chasing her white whale or the impossible dream of I can change him, which is such a inherently female thing to do, right? You know, even the strongest women in my life, some of them latch on to people they think they can fix. And Tony is this Mount Everest of that, right? If I can fix him, what will that mean for me? And so it's this fascination with him, with his life. You know, when else will you get to know the gangster and get inside his head? Don't you ever meet somebody on the street and you're like, man, I wish I could see the, like, you know, true Hollywood story on this person because I want to know how you got here.
Right.
She gets this. There are plenty of people in my life I feel that way, and I'll never get that opportunity to know this about them because I don't, right? Because I'm never going to ask those questions. She gets to ask those questions of the boss of a mob family. How fascinating, right? It's hard to give that up, and it's hard to address those feelings herself, even being as emotionally intelligent as Melfi is, because she's never felt this way either.
Yeah.
Lily, we often talk on this podcast, as you know, sure, you're a dedicated listener and our biggest fan.
True.
We often talk about the concept of the missing scene, all the scenes that we don't get to see because the show is essentially Tony-centric. Do we think that we're missing any scenes with Dr. Melfi where she fantasizes about Tony?
100%. There's absolutely a sister scene where she is also having some kind of sex dream with Tony Soprano. 1,000%. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been at the forefront of her brain in that family scene, right? Because she's not doing that about her other patients. He's definitely tapping into that unconscious sexuality that human beings have.
And again,
right?
we don't get many actual scenes of it, as Jordan calls it, the missing scene. But there are a lot of hints that there is sexual feeling for Tony. For one thing, I don't even count this as, well, he's a gangster, because she wasn't scared in this moment. But when Tony kisses her, she gently pushes back and says, hey, we need to talk about this. There's not fear there, whereas some women might push back and be gentle out of a fear of saying no to somebody. What I see in that moment is her trying to hold the professional line. And there's also another moment later in the season, in the episode Isabella, when they're having their therapy session in the car after Junior attempts to kill Tony and he's snapped out of his depressive stupor. I made note of this. He touches her face with the back of his hand, and her reaction isn't, Anthony, it's inappropriate for our, she smiles. She smiles at him, and it's like, that's not something you do for a normal patient. If I ever touched any of my therapists' faces in a gentle way, even after an attempted hit, there would have been some kind of, hey,
Sure.
Yeah, you know what I mean? None of that here.
Perhaps not as intimate as that, but a scene that really stayed with me after this season's rewatch for this podcast was when Dr. Melfi goes to have dinner at the Cusimanos, and she excuses herself to the restroom. She doesn't like the conversation, and she knows he lives next door. And she creeps up onto the toilet bowl and she's looking at his house. And that is such an intimate moment. And then later, Tony acknowledges it. You saw my house. There is, talk about dialogue thick with subtext or a shot thick with subtext. She had to see it. It's almost like she goes there to be alone with him for a moment just to see his house.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely a curiosity there, for sure. But she's not in love. And neither is he. He thinks he is. And she's trying not to think she is, but I don't think either of them actually are.
I think I agree with Lily, and I think it's all well said, particularly given the power of this framework that Tony has never met another woman like this. What other person has Tony cried openly in front of? Nobody. Well, I mean, these are immense moments in the pilot, and then another. During this retrospective, I think I will talk about this scene again, the scene in the car with Melfi, when he touches her face. And when she presses him on the dream sequence or the hallucination of Isabella as a mother, he's brought to tears again. So there is a kind of intimacy there, even as I agree with Lily that something in the love question is a misapplication of terms, I think.
Let's be very clear, romantic love. Because I think he has love for her. you know, and I think she has love for him, but they're not in love with each other in a romantic sense. Because again, you know, the big part about Isabella was when she points out that, so this wasn't sexual at all, right? And I think that's a big part is again, Tony has every reason to cry about a lot of things in his life, right? Especially his mother. And no one's ever cared for him that way. Carmela's decent, but she's still very harsh. Her voice is not anything. You know, Melfi's got this very dulcet, resonant voice, whereas Carmela and Livia have these very strident voices, right? They're very difficult to listen to. And we love it because it's very funny and a lot comes out of that. But there's nothing really nurturing to Tony about these women.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears here a little bit. I think now might be an interesting time to get into one of our top 3 categories.
Ooh, excited.
Top 3.
It's the top 3 song. We're just making it up now as we go.
All right. Yeah, top 3 song. That
was
great.
by Visiting Day.
Oh, God. That's too good for Visiting Day.
Meow.
This is one of the most infinitely quotable shows ever, and this season certainly sets a precedent for great quotes. So I want to get into favorite quotes here. There's a lot of, I mean, as far as quotes that stick with you and are memorable and funny, I mean, if we were doing funny quotes, it would have to be a top 10 list. But these are just quotes that stuck with you for whatever reason. And I have a top 3 here. I'll kick us off since this is the first one. I have, we each, I don't know, do you have a top 3 quotes?
I have one.
You have one? Great. We each have quotes that we like from the show. I have a top 3. My number 3 is a Junior quote. This is going to sound so silly for a favorites of the season, but I'll tell you why in a second. But there's a scene in the episode Boca where Junior and Mikey, they're having a meeting in the lawyer's office, and they order sandwiches. They're going over their legal strategy, and Junior says the line, "Peppers and eggs. That's what I should have had." And that's the quote. The reason that stuck with me is twofold. One, up until I saw that scene, first time years and years and years and years ago, I didn't know peppers and eggs was a sandwich. So I was like, ooh, that does sound interesting. Let me get it. And I loved it. And peppers and eggs is a great sandwich that I enjoy. But the reason that's a quote for me, and my next 2 quotes are a little bit more weighted as far as their gravitas in the season. But peppers and eggs, that's what I should have had. I say that so often. Anytime there's a sandwich ordering situation, I slip that in there. And it's become a part of my lexicon. I just say that all the time in Junior cadence. Peppers and eggs. That's what I should have had.
Love it.
It's great.
I now order peppers and eggs so I don't have to say it. It's so good.
Lesson learned.
I agree with Chris. That's a great line, and I love peppers and eggs.
Yeah. What are your number 3s or...
So my number 3 is a Livia quote. It is because we used to quote this in the house all the time. Remember, I started watching this with my parents back in the late 90s when the show was out. This was like a thing we would do as a family on Sundays. The quote is really 2 parts of the same quote. The first is, "Oh, poor you," right, which is what she says frequently. I'm referring to it specifically in the episode 46 long, which is the first time it comes up, but then continues to, and we used to just pour this on my mother anytime she would complain about anything superficial, but we would quote at her, "Then kill me now, go on, go into the ham and take the carving knife and stab me here, now, please. It would hurt me less than what you just said." I think it's wonderful. I think it's Livia at her most dramatic. It is deeply funny, but Tony does not laugh. This is not funny for him.
Oh, yeah.
But I think it's a nice moment with the audience as well, because we see that, boy, she's got him wrapped around her finger. She could say anything. He takes it as it is. Even he might be aware that it's overdramatic, but he doesn't dismiss it. He addresses it. He, in that scene, works so hard with her to try to convince her that Green Grove is a good idea and something she really needs, and this is her reaction. And initially, I kind of dismissed the quote myself as being like, oh, that's just a funny thing we used to say, but the loss of her house and the fact that she gets kind of put into Green Grove and ultimately into the nursing home is really why Livia enacts this revenge on Tony. So actually, this quote ended up with more significance than initially even I thought. I just thought it was a funny thing we said.
That's great. That's a great quote. Great scene. Great moment. Might be the best scene in that episode, and I love that episode. Paul, you have a number 3?
I do. It's not something I expected to write down, but I was looking at some scenes from over the course of the season, there's a scene in Legend of Tennessee Moltisanti when Paulie comes over at Chris's place and says this place looks like a sty, all that stuff. And the following exchange takes place. Chris says to Paulie, "You ever think that nothing good was ever going to happen to you?" And Paulie says, "Yeah, and nothing did. So what?" It's a very funny line. It also is The Sopranos.
Yeah.
It also is this show from beginning to end. There is no structure. There is no plan. If life is a tragedy, then it's an absurd one. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And that's about as comforted as you're going to be. So it has that quality where it is very... Paulie's line reading is great. Tony Sirico's sensational in this role, and we'll see more of him as he digs deeper over the course of the series. So it's a funny scene. It's a funny line. But I think it also frames pretty nicely what these characters are gunning for in life, the answers and the comfort that they are seeking that they're not going to find.
Would you like to drop your quote?
Yeah, I only prepared one. I found this exercise a little overwhelming because there's just so many good ones.
This is the one I struggled with the most too.
You know, there's it's so inherently quotable, and do you go profound or do you go the funny route, you know? And you'll hear me bring up this moment, the larger scene again later, but when Carmela's finally telling off Father Phil, and she just goes, "Even if just last week I told you I'm not a big Renee Zellweger fan." Like, it's such a beautiful passive-aggressive comment that you say just to really twist that knife, right? Yeah. And it's just the way she says it too, it just gets me every time because it's so specific.
It is.
I just love that so much. And I love the whole scene. And again, I'll bring that up in a little bit. But
that line, it conjures images of me of Carmela in the nail salon. And like maybe one of the other wives of New Jersey saw a movie with Renee Zellweger. And I can just picture Carmela like, I never liked her.
Exactly. Precisely. And I'm sure that that's something she brings up every time. Every woman has that actress that you feel that way about, right? And it's like, and Renee Zellweger happens to be a very divisive actress anyway.
She is.
Yeah, for no reason. She's very talented.
She's very talented.
She's always good.
Always good.
Always good. But I digress. I love that scene, and I love that line. I love her delivery of it. Yeah. And I'll call Edie Falco a goddess until the day I die, because she is.
My number 2 line is said much later in the season. It's a Tony Soprano quote. This is one I think for the record books. This might even be a top 10 of the series quote for me. But just Tony very simply going over in bed with Carmela when Carmela's supporting him after everything with Junior and Livia comes out. The "what kind of person can I be where his own mother wants him dead" scene. And he says just very bluntly after just going through the series of events with Carmela, "Cunnilingus and psychiatry brought us to this." And it's just talking about the absurdity of this tragedy, Paul, as you said, just like there's a lot of moments to come still in the show without getting into spoiler-specific stuff where something very little, a little razzing about eating pussy, a little, just little jokes, little comments here and there that escalate to life and death, murderous circumstances. And that just kind of encapsulates it. That's season 1 in a nutshell, man. Cunnilingus and psychiatry brought us to this mess.
Yeah, little comments and gifts are the 2 most dangerous things to have or give
on the Sopranos. Yeah.
My number 2 is a quote that we actually did discuss on the show when we did our genetics episode for Down Neck. It is another Livia quote. Eminently, I find her very quotable. And she says, "Well, you only remember what you want to remember." And she, in the beautiful Nancy Marchand line delivery, kind of does it as a throwaway, but the line really hits.
Yeah.
And it hits, of course, in the context of that episode in which flashback is used so effectively. But more than that, that is also a quote that is just important to every episode of The Sopranos, especially when you have a character who is invested in therapy, and so much of therapy is processing your own memories, trauma, experiences. And I think it's true. We had a great conversation actually in the pre-show of this recording where we were talking about, comparing, the plots in The Sopranos to Tennessee Williams plays. Tennessee Williams plays are largely plays that are done in memory play form, especially the Glass Menagerie, but also relates to past trauma, overcoming past trauma, remembering the past in a certain way, in a way that you must process it and get past it. Because we see the show largely through Tony's perspective, we are with his version of things and how he remembers them, and to see what he remembers and why it was important is fascinating. And of course, Livia holds a grudge. She sees that her son is in therapy. She takes the most narcissistic interpretation of that he is in therapy because of her, and she's right.
So good. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a critical analysis as far as I'm concerned of this season. Paul?
In Boca, which is among my favorite episodes ever of the show, the question of the coach culminates with whether or not Tony will exact mob justice. And Melfi asks him the question that doesn't get an answer: why do you, Anthony Soprano, always have to set things right? It's such an important question, not just in terms of that plot, but in terms of how Tony sees himself, and in terms of how he conducts himself based on that identity. Because when we were discussing in a completely unrelated episode, I think Pax Soprano, Jordan dug into the import of Tony seeing himself as a provider to the different women, as if there was no way he could not be that thing. And so Melfi, I think, is asking a very important question here of our hero, that we've seen in these various manifestations Tony as, quote, death come knocking, that you can't stop him. But we're seeing a limit to his power, and we're seeing a limit to his ability, I think, to delude himself into thinking that he is this unstoppable form of justice. Because that's what the show is, I think, is this characters wrestling with these dark places, these obscure questions. So that was my number 2 quote, just because of the thesis of what we're doing here, and Melfi asking him that direct question. It's another great Sopranos cut, because I think once she asks that question, there is no answer, and it cuts to another scene.
Yeah.
So I wrote that down just because I knew that we are dealing with it throughout this season, and we'll deal with it for another 76 episodes.
Oh, very good. My number 1 quote is from the episode I Dream of Jeannie Cusimano. I believe it's one of the last things said in the entire season. It's Tony having dinner with the kids and Carmela at the blacked out Vesuvio in the middle of this storm after everything has gone down. And he says to them, he raises a toast, someday soon you're going to have families of your own. And if you're lucky, you'll remember the little moments like this that were good. It's very powerful to me, given what not only this guy has been through this season, to say that, to try to impart that onto his kids, but especially knowing what we know of Tony's childhood, which is probably not filled with very many of these moments. It's amazing knowing what we know about Tony's mother, about how he was raised, about the fact, we talked about this when we talked about Down Neck in our podcast, how his family just all seem to hate him. His sisters hate him. His mother is Livia. His father just kind of treats him like an appendage or something, more like a burden than anything, at least from what we see in this episode. And Tony still is a nostalgic motherfucker. He looks back on the past fondly. He's able to cherry pick certain elements and things like that. And I don't know, I just found it a very powerful way to end the season, because ultimately this is something that a gangster wouldn't necessarily say. This is something any dad would say to their family for a toast. And that sense of normalcy in the world of the mob and the gangster stakes that are in every moment of this show is what the show is about. And I think that's why David Chase chose that as the last line of the season, because there's something that the creators of this show find fascinating in these guys engaging in mundane American activities. And I agree with them. That's why I love the show. So That's my number 1.
And I certainly connected to the moment in Pilot after Tony has been taken to the hospital and he's sitting on the exam table and he's trying to convince Carmela or suggest her, well, we had some good times, didn't we?
Yeah.
He's obsessed with this idea that they will remember some goodness from him.
Yeah.
And I think that calls back to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my number 1 quote, Lily referenced this earlier, and I want to just repeat it. I think it's some of the best writing in the show. He's talking to Dr. Melfi in the office in Pax Soprano He's trying to describe what he finds special about Melfi specifically. He's talking about the way that she is not overt in her sexuality. He's talking about the way she dresses. He says, it's sexy, understated, like you. You play it down. Not only do you play it down, but you're gentle, not loud, sweet sounding, like a mandolin. And it's the moment right before he will stand up out of the chair, he will walk to her, and he will try to kiss her. And he basically gets there. And that line just knocks me off my fucking chair. It really does. Because not only is it just some damn good writing, it's a great moment. It's a great thing that we've been building to. And it's like, wow, this is his play. And he's saying something really profound and sweet and wonderful. And I almost would want to say like very un-Tony Soprano-like, but I think it's just we've never quite seen this side of him. He doesn't say these things to Carmela ever.
Yeah.
We don't get this kind of romance from him, and this is really genuine. Also, he hits on something so important. We'll talk about this, I'm sure, later in this episode, but there are these things that elude Tony, right? Higher education and art and philosophy, and these things are kind of swimming around him, and he keeps trying to grab at them. And the closest he's gotten is this person through which the door has been opened for him. And when he calls her a mandolin, we like that so much we actually titled one of our episodes this season, Mandolin. He is trying to make this distinction that Lily brought up just earlier. The other women in his life are not like this. They are not this fine thing that sounds sweet. He thinks he finally has the answer to the great big hole right in the middle of him. But it's not quite there.
That's a perfect transition into this quote that I chose, because I think that there is this quality of him reaching for something, and I think it's one of the reasons that I've identified with him, even though in so many ways I disapprove of Tony from beginning to end. At the end of the first season, yes, it is in the last episode, when he's realized that his mother, in essence, took out the hit, he's being comforted by Carmela in the same scene. Cunnilingus in psychiatry quote. And my number one quote is in that scene. Tony says the following: "I'll deal with my uncle, and I'll deal with Mikey P, and I'll get some satisfaction, but inside, I'll know." But that's an extraordinary line. It is well written. It also suggests that Tony is going to get revenge on the people who tried to kill him, and he will enjoy it to some degree. He will live the good life of the gangster. But my mother tried to have me killed.
Yeah.
And that is going to be with me for the rest of my born days. And he knows it. And that is why The Sopranos was different. That's one of the reasons they were able to do anything they wanted in terms of what these characters were searching for and how. And so that's why I chose it. In part because I do like the writing, but also because it's an example of what sets these characters and the show apart.
Wow. Well said, Paul. And that's a great transition into the next topic I want to discuss, which is, in my opinion, what season 1 is really about. As far as Tony is concerned, where Tony plugs into the world. I think each season of the show puts Tony in a different role in relation to the characters around him. And if I had to pick one role for Tony in season 1, it's Tony as son. Tony as offspring, as a person who is responsible for the care of his elders. In particular, in the family side, he's dealing with his mother, and on the gangster side, he's dealing with Junior. So let's talk about Tony as a son to Livia and as a surrogate son to Junior and how that played out in the story. I think Tony is, if nothing else, a good son. He always tries to do right by Livia. He always brings her something. He thinks about her. He's genuinely upset in the episode 46 long to the point where it's the second panic attack he has. Well, sorry, the third panic attack we see in the show. The second episode we see him having a panic attack when he's packing up his mom's stuff. He really wants to be a good son, and Livia's just not the kind of mother who can have that kind of son and be grateful for it.
Well, she feels no joy, but what's also interesting is, and I think we know, we of course we know this, where's Janice? Where's Barbara?
Yeah, he has
Is
Janice
that her
and
name?
Janice and Barbara. We were caught on his two siblings, Janice and Barbara.
They're completely out of the picture.
Yeah.
Where are they trying to find a nursing home or find a solution?
And one of the first things she says to him in the first episode is, "Daughters are better at taking care of their mothers than sons." Where the fuck are Janice and Barb?
Yeah.
What a thing to say. This to the guy who's here, bringing you a CD player.
She's already isolated them. Well, let's give some credit to these characters, even though they're not with us yet on the show.
I'm going to give Janice credit.
Well, I can't mention too much about Janice yet, but I will say that they have Livia figured out better than Tony does. Tony wears a great big pair of blindfolds over both eyes when it comes to his mother. He can't see what she actually does. They saw it and they got away from it.
That's a good point. Tony, I was thinking about this when you had your quote earlier too. Tony really struggles with a lot of cognitive dissonance when it comes to Livia, right? If anybody else said to him what Livia says to him, he'd say brush them off. Like, what are they talking about, right? This is so dramatic. This is so nothing. But when it's your mother, right, he always holds her up to the pinnacle. It's like he never had that switch. I feel like most adults have that switch where you realize your parents are just human beings who are trying to do their best. But as children, we hold them up as the pinnacle, right? This is your mother. This is your father, right? You honor these people. And he never had that. He must never have had that flip, right? That this is just a normal human being who doesn't have the right to talk to him that way when he's really trying his best. And he really, truly is trying his best with this woman, but she just continually hurts him.
Yeah, and to your point, Lily, I think everyone else on the show sees it but him.
Yep.
We observe Livia through other characters' eyes. Everyone knows that she's very difficult, or, really more than difficult. Carmela acknowledges that, she was warned about marrying Tony because of his mother. And he tells her, oh, don't bring that up again. But it's a very real thing. When people see Livia, when Artie goes to see her in the nursing home at the end of the season, it is with great trepidation. He knows he has to watch what he says and how he interprets the hurtful things that she says. We see that even in Friends of Tony when we're at, I think is it Larry Boy's daughter's wedding?
Yes.
Right? He knows, listen, just take what she says with a grain of salt, basically because she's psychotic. When Melfi tells him, she has borderline personality disorder, he is deeply offended, but we've already seen those symptoms the entire season, and we know that Melfi's correct.
Yeah, everyone sees it but Tony. Even in the pilot, it's not to a very complex degree, but Livia calls with some dramatic, crying, isn't coming to AJ's birthday party. And Tony says she needs a purpose in life, and Carmela snaps back, your mother's a lot tougher than you think. We're even getting hints in the pilot that this is not going somewhere Tony will never see coming until it hits him square in the face.
I think it's these ideas that come up for Livia are so compelling because I think in essence, when you boil it down, it's a woman who, as Lily mentioned, can't experience joy, and because her anxieties are, in Melfi's terms, the only things that are real to her, she can't really have any kind of meaningful relationships. The only way she can have any effect or any power is to sow discord. Junior doesn't seem that far gone psychologically, but the framework of the story is such that he is so insecure. And Tony, of course, is quite manipulative, not unlike his mother, that it leads Junior away from what are very clearly, I think, some fatherly instincts towards Tony, places them in the worst possible place you could with Mikey Palmisi, who's as sycophantic as the day is long, and with Livia, and it adds up to the absurd tragedy of this season. It is fascinating how sad so much of that story is when there's so many funny moments. But I think that one of the things that was sad for me, particularly in rewatching this season and hearing the perspectives from you guys on it, was that it really did feel to me like there was another way that Junior's life in particular could have gone in this framework. And that he was undone, certainly in part by his own insecurities, but also by the other factor. Tony is manipulating people from the word go in this show. That's the point. And he's always, always, always from the start using therapy to his own ends and not the broader ends of feeling better as a social being or anything like that. It's about how There's one point later on in the show where he says in therapy, how do you get people to do what you want? I mean, that's always the focus if you're a gangster. So,
yeah, very well said. Let's transition now into another top 3. We got a lot of these today. So the next one I want to talk about is food. Food is such a huge...
Top 3 food. Top 3.
Bow, bow.
It's the top 3 food.
Yeah.
All right, very nice. Top 3 food. Yeah, I mean, we got Visiting Day fucking beat as far as I'm
Oh,
concerned.
yeah, no, our top 3 song is tits. It's great.
Take that, Richie Santini. So this category for me can be either specific dishes. It's like, wow, that looks good. I want to fucking eat that. Or moments revolving around food. Food is such an important part of the Italian culture. It's what brings everybody to the
And
table.
it's in every episode. You can't
Loaded.
find an episode without a food reference or without a food scene.
Yeah, it's all over the place. People are picking. People are gathering at Sunday dinner. Season 1 in particular has these Sunday dinner scenes that just sizzle. They're so good. So there's a lot of food all over this show. So let's go through and talk about our favorite moments or food dish. Anything revolving around food. Top 3.
Sure, we might get a couple of doubled up ones
Yeah, if we
here,
get
and
doubled
that's
up,
okay.
yeah.
But because I have brought it today, I brought some pastry so that we can enjoy after we finish recording. But I've actually brought some schwagadelle with me today, the pastry to enjoy. Important in the show in 2 episodes, right? So, of course, the more famous scene is when Chris Moltisanti goes to the bakery. He's trying to get some Napoleon, some schwagadelle, whatever, bring it to the guys. They give him a hard time. We get kind of a rehash of the business in Goodfellas where he shoots off the kid's foot and he gets the pastries and he takes off. But I think an equally good moment is actually all the way back in Pilot. We have Hunter comes over to be with Meadow before they go to school, and AJ's just kind of running around the kitchen. And AJ actually grabs some schwagadelle and he dunks it right in the pitcher of milk that everyone is using for breakfast, which the girls find disgusting. And I thought that actually might be our earliest food reference on the show.
Yeah.
Is this Italian pastry there for that?
I agree. And also, I don't know if this is one of the moments that's coming up, so forgive me if I step on anybody here, but talking about pastry in specific, Tony visits Pussy with a box of pastries and nobody knows anything. He's trying to get him to open up and maybe, hey, everything good? You have friends, pal. So pastries are a great way for Italian folks to open up.
Yeah. So that was my number 3.
That's
but
great.
I guess that was technically 2 in 1, but whatever.
well, and I think when in Nobody Knows Anything, when Tony brings those nice cannolis or whatever,
I think it was cannolis.
Yeah, it was cannolis.
Pussy says, "Oh, what is it, Spinelli's?" And Tony says, "No, Stop It Shop. What do you think?" Because Tony went to the nice bakery.
Yeah.
I have a few. Another shout out, just honorable mention is I love ricotta pie.
Yeah, the regatta pie is one of mine.
The ricotta
Absolutely,
pie,
yeah.
but so we'll leave that.
No, don't. You could dive right in. Let's the regatta pie conversation.
Well, I know that Livia turns her nose up at it because it's too fatty, and then with the low-fat cheese, then she's disgusted by it. But I like it when I go to Mike's Pastry in Boston, get some nice ricotta pie.
I feel like we could do a whole 45-minute episode on the food Livia rejects.
I think the regatta pie scene is so great too because this is so Livia has rejected the idea of attending the open house at the Soprano household, which is, by the way, an idea that is totally bizarre to me. Perhaps because of my economic status, I could not fathom the idea of having an open
None
house.
of us know what the fuck that means.
Yeah, I don't get it. Maybe show off the new furniture. I don't know.
It's just a party.
Yeah, I guess they're just having a party.
It's just a party for no reason. So you open your house, you come when you want, right? Like, my house never looks nice enough for that, so yeah.
Right, yeah. My parents certainly never had one. So Livia has rejected coming, but they still brought her something from the party, and I think it's so considerate. First of all, regatta pie is not easy to make.
No.
Like, sort of notoriously.
My mother makes a killer regatta pie.
That's
She does,
awesome, awesome. And Carmela's being so nice to bring her this pie, and she knows that she's having a problem with cholesterol or with fat, so she brings her one that's specifically low fat, and Livia goes, ugh, just is grossed out by it, rejects it, makes her feel bad. This is after not even greeting Carmela at the door, by the way.
Opens it and turns and
Can
walks
you imagine?
back
She
in.
opens it and shows her back and walks away from her. Just the pinnacle of
And
rudeness.
Carmela says, "Oh, hi, Carmela. Nice to see you."
Yeah, exactly. But that regatta pie scene, Paul, is also a great moment with Carmela because we get some of Carmela's sharpness here too. You know what you're doing. Tony is obsessed with your happiness. Who am I? You're his mother. You're larger than life. right? Carmela's the only one that gets it right.
Yeah.
It's her and Melfi, how big that presence is, and that's the regat pie scene.
Was that your number 2 moment, Jordan? Or is that your number 1?
That's my regat pie is my number 1
Wow. Okay.
moment. Yeah, I have one other food moment, but we'll get to it.
Paul, did you have a number 3? I know that regat pie was your honorable mention.
Yeah, the antipasto that Tony and Bobby have in bed in Boca. I want to have that.
Junior
my
Bobby.
God.
Yeah, I want to have.
Pass me them red peppers.
I want to have those red peppers. I kind of want Bobby to feed them to me in post-coital bliss. I'm also just a big antipasto fan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Thin
God.
sliced meats
So
and
much.
stuff.
Oof.
So.
That
My
pasta
favorite
looks fucking
indeed.
delicious.
Yeah, I'm sure this might be on everyone's list, but that last scene in Vesuvio, it's just such a, again, we talked about how it's this really human moment. It's pouring out, everybody's lost power, they come in, they're getting wet, and then everybody they know is there, right? We've really, the poor Buccos have really tried, or at least Charmaine has really tried for this place not to be a mob hotspot, and here we are with everybody, all of Tony and his friends. But they do have this really wholesome moment at the table, and they're all, whatever he has looks delicious.
Oh, yeah.
Like
I'd
I'll
eat
whip
anything
something
already
up.
Bucco cooks.
Everything out of Vesuvio, the
Yeah.
lunch they have at the Rosalie and Carmela have too. Everything just always looks at Vesuvio so perfect.
Yeah, Lily, to your point too, that last scene in Vesuvio, last scene of the series, of the season is so potent as well, because we also get this sense that food is talismanic, that it somehow can hold off the darkness, right? That it unites us as a family, as a people, both families united by food in that moment. That might be the most significant food moment, honestly.
Yeah.
It's really terrific.
Well, and you mentioned how food is all over the Sopranos in this season.
Sorry.
And this season especially. But food is such a cultural, I would say an Italian thing, but any culture has that, right?
Comes together around their
Comes
food.
together around food. It's such a universal thing. But when you're Italian, especially, right? You've got this delicious cuisine, so versatile with the fish, and you got pasta, and you got everything. But that's a part of it. That's how Italians especially connect with each other. There's always going to be coffee and pastry, or there's going to be an antipasto, or all of that. It's part of why I love having married into an Italian family, because the food is so great, and it's such a communal piece. It's coming together over food.
You're welcome,
the-
love. You're welcome.
The food makes it unequivocal how clear it is that David Chase is so influenced by Scorsese.
Yeah.
Particularly
Oh,
in Goodfellas, when you see how important food is as a tribal concept.
My
we
favorite
come
dinner
together.
scene in Goodfellas, I think, is when they stop in at Tommy's mother's house when they got fucking they got Billy Bats in the trunk, and he has to take the knife, and it's so good. To your point, my number 3 food scene is the lobster dinner the Capos have in Meadowlands. They're just like. These are like the top 5 guys, or top 4 guys. Junior's the other capo because Jackie's still alive. And they're all talking about the succession, and Tony has to kind of reluctantly pass it off as like, I don't want any disturbance, and everyone's like, Tony, it's got to be you. I mean, Junior, whatever, and they're all giving reasons why they can't do it.
Yeah, the old man and Jackie, they said it was you from day one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and they're just, while they're doing it, they're just tearing these lobsters apart, and I love lobster.
Yeah, that was my honorable mention. That's a great scene.
Yeah. On my honorable mention, I do have some of these categories. I do have honorable mentions because these are so hard to narrow down. My honorable mention food moment just makes me smile every time I see it. Is in the episode Denial, Anger, Acceptance, when Tony and Artie have a food fight. And Tony's just had enough of him complaining and whining about his restaurant.
Yeah.
He tells him, "Shut the fuck up about it, you depressing jerk." And Artie just comes back, "The fuck do you know about it?" Throws like a piece of ham at him. It just like hangs on his face for a second. You're like, oh my! And to the newly initiated to the Sopranos who don't quite understand Tony and Artie's relationship yet, you think, oh my god, is Tony gonna like fucking strangle this guy?
Yeah.
He's just like, you motherfucker, and throws like a rice ball at him. And they have a food fight in his kitchen. That's such a fun moment. I love Artie Bucco. And that's just that's my honorable mention. And the Capo lobster dinner in Meadowlands is a big one.
I think that's wonderful. So I'm going to do my number 2 moment because we already discussed my number 1, the regal pie, was with Paul a moment ago. My number, my number 2, I've done my 1 and my 3 already, is actually the gavadel with the duck ragu that Artie brings to Livia in I Dream of Jeannie Cusimano, where Livia, of course, lets it slip that Tony is the one that burned down Vesuvio. She does make it rather pointedly to... That is the thing she clearly remembers in that scene. She doesn't know who Artie is. She says, "Oh, you used to play, ball with my Johnny." No, Tony.
Artie's so good in that scene,
But
too.
when the Vesuvio thing is brought up, oh, right, that's the restaurant you had and your father had. She brings up just how important it is. It's this generational thing, and then that's the rug she's going to rip out. And again, this is a bit of food that Livia's disappointed with it.
Yeah.
Cavadelle with the duck ragu. It's northern. Ugh. Northern.
Right. It's so real, too.
Also, it was one of the things you get to see it on the show, and it looked so good. I really wanted to eat that specifically.
And talking about nostalgia and food in The Sopranos, to that another notch in that scene's belt in this category, Artie's connection to Livia in a simple way for such an accomplished chef. We go back a ways. You make a mean PB&J. That's great. That's great stuff.
Yeah.
It's a great scene, too.
My number 2 is also the cavatel with the duck ragu.
Yeah.
Crossover
My
there.
note says the cavatel with duck ragu that Livia turned her nose up at because it's northern.
Sure.
I love that scene. It's so funny. It's so real what Artie's going through. It's also another thing I like about that scene is there is no reward for kindness on The Sopranos.
Correct.
I tried to search for some ulterior motive where Artie, in going to visit this old woman, is self-serving in some way, but I really just think Artie lost his own mother recently. Artie still loves Tony, and the poor woman, she's up there, she's alone, she's probably lonely. But as Jordan pointed out, Artie knows that he has to play this game carefully, but he really works hard to be nice to her and say, even to the point of awkwardness, like, "You got lots of sun in here." Like, it's so weird that, so then the heartbreak at the end. But yeah, I also just want to eat that duck ragu. I still can't believe that Livia looks away from it.
Yeah, and to your point, Paul, from our previous episode, an individualist, I think it was you that mentioned duck ragu specifically, bringing the image of the duck that has been cooked and put into this thing as kind of a death of family, death of that symbol of innocence kind of thing. This is almost like a last meal type situation.
This is very simple, but also in that episode, Carmela throws away the penne with vodka sauce.
I'm going to get to that.
That's my number 1.
Oh, really?
I mean, I can't, because that's so... it's very simple. It's a simple dish, but I love it.
Another one we really see, because you actually see it pouring out into the garbage.
It looks so good.
And it looks so good, yeah.
Oh, my house is maybe 7 minutes from that church. It's like, please just drive it right up here and drop it at my house. Don't put it in the garbage. That's your number 1 moment, Paul?
Yes.
So you both have given your 2 and 1, so I'll give my big 2 here. Related to yours, though a little bit different, because it's connected in the same story thread. Number 2 for me is Carmela's ziti, which Father Phil admits drives him. Now we know that there's other things driving him into Casa
Is this what he had a yen
in
for?
college? I had a Jones for your big ziti.
A Jones.
Yeah. She's like, "Oh, I got some in the freezer. Heat it up." It's just like, I love it because I'm sure Carmela always has baked ziti in her freezer. It's one of those things you just go there for. And Lily, my wife Lily, is an amazing, amazing cook. But I would give anything to have Carmela's baked ziti. I'm sure
me
it's
too.
fucking
Yeah.
Oh,
dynamite.
yeah. What a horrible... I hate Father Phil. What a horrible man.
Oh, me too.
Probably my second worst character on the show. The worst in the season is obviously, I think, Coach Hauser, but Father Phil's down at the bottom for me, too. Not because of that actor. The actor does a fine job, but I
He
just...
does a great job, actually.
It's the corruption of the priest role. I can never stomach it. I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah, no, Father Phil's terrible. My number 1 food moment was Tony and AJ in Down Neck.
Oh, the ice cream.
And we had a lengthy chat about it during the episode and then after the episode.
Oh, wait, I have to preemptively, not cry about it. Go on, I'm safe.
But just the idea of Tony trying to fix something that was broken through an ice cream sundae. And then we had a conversation after we shut the podcast off. I want to put a pause on this for a second because I want to bring it up when we talk about some behind the scenes podcast business a little bit. But just the idea of a dad and a son sharing an ice cream, there's nothing more. Yeah, it's sweet, it's beautiful, it's a great moment. It ends an amazing fucking episode. I'm sure it's going to be on at least somebody's favorite episode list when we get there. But It's a great moment in a great episode in one of the best of the season moments of the season for me all around is AJ and Tony having their Sunday at the end of Down Neck.
And Chris, that moment, not just as a food moment, but in the All Together, is one of the things that made, for me anyway, choosing top 3 moments in the whole season very difficult. Because so many, sometimes short scenes, sometimes long scenes with a lot of dialogue, in that case, short scene without a bunch, amazingly effective.
This is a great way to get into conversation, these top 3. So let's roll quickly into our next one here. Let's just keep rolling.
Sure.
The next category we have, I think, is music cues. We can't talk about The Sopranos in a serious way without addressing the use of music.
Sure.
Sopranos is unique in one way as far as the music goes, because my understanding, and I'm not associated with the show in any way, my understanding through interviews and some other sources is that David Chase personally has a hand in every piece of music that is put into the show. That's normally not a series creator job, at least as far as picking but there's so much music in the show, so much great music in this show, and so it had to be a category as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So top 3 music cues. Let's start with Paul, since we're going around the table here.
My third one is Paparazzi at the end of Pax Soprana, which is a great tune. It's perfectly utilized, and it really builds tension in this moment when the plot is moving forward. Even though the plot has solidified Tony's position both as the de facto boss and as the underboss who is being hidden from exposure to the feds. But because the feds are so close, because Junior can be dangerous even if he's not strategically always effective, the music really underscores that and does a terrific job with it, and it makes particularly the ending of Pax Soprana, I think, very memorable.
I agree.
For me, my number 3 music cue is at the end of the pilot. We get this, we're all kind of assembled at the party, all of the story beats have been told, we've met all our characters, we've started all our story threads, and it's been such a crazy hour of television, and there's so much shit going on, and we get this still shot of the pool, and then the soft sounds of Nick Lowe's The Beast in Me. I just think it was a perfect way to end that episode.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great song.
It's a great song. It's gentle. There's something kind of eerie and gentle and also calming about it. It's a perfect ending for that episode, and of course, a great song for many of the characters in the show as well.
One of my favorite uses of music, this is my number 3, is actually the Welsh choir song All Through the Night. There's a beautiful musical sequence that takes us out of denial, anger, acceptance, where, of course, Meadow and Hunter are part of their choral recital. And during the recital, we get sequences of Tony arriving late to the recital and joining Carmela for the solo. That goes through Chris's scare, where the guys seem like they're going to shoot him. He, soils himself, that whole business. And of course, it goes through Mikey P's hit on Brendan, Hijack Byjack.
So good.
Is all during that choir performance, and it was just terrific. It was such a cinematic sequence. It was beautiful, and you have this song about the things that happen in the night, and the moon is watching us all, and I thought it was just beautiful use of music.
Agreed. Number 2.
My number 2, I actually don't have the name of the artist in front of me. It's a Spanish language love song called Frente Frente, which is used twice in Boca to quite great effect. The first is when Junior and Bobby are dancing in Boca Raton, and she's messing with him, telling some jokes, and he's saying, "That's my reputation you're playing with." And this song is playing, Spanish language, passionate song about a love affair that seems to be coming apart.
Yeah.
And one of the key lyrics, of course, sung in Spanish is, "Are you afraid to tell me the truth?" And too much spoken is the key to that relationship breaking apart. And
Right.
then it also plays in that terrible moment when Junior calls her names and puts a pie in her face, essentially says they're done and walks out, and you see the look of regret on his face, and the music scales up again. It's perfectly done.
Lily and I watched Boca again in preparation for this Retrospective, and that scene gets me emotional every time.
Me too.
Yeah, it's brutal. And yeah, great moment, great use of music, Paul. I absolutely agree. My number 2 for music is the use of Tinderstick's Tiny Tears in the episode Isabella. It just weaves through this perfectly, and it just underscores the melancholy and numbness that Tony's feeling in these moments. Tiny tears make up an ocean, and just the lyrics fit, the mood fits, the way the camera work fits the song. And then when the wind swells, the song swells, you get all these violins going. It's dramatic. It's like whoever fucking found and utilized that song for this was it was just a genius pick for a genius episode, and it's all over the episode. It's like I see Tony stumbling around with the 5 o'clock shadow in the bathrobe, and I just hear that song in my head every time. I picture it. It's perfect. It's great.
My number 2 is from, of course, A Hit is a Hit, which is sort of an overtly musical episode.
Oh, please be Defiler.
It is not Defiler. Listen, as much as I wanted to include Defiler Visiting Day on my list, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It's a real song. It's called Nobody Loves Me But You, which is a Dory Hartley song. This is a song that not a lot of people know. In fact, as I was kind of like doing a little research online, a lot of people found this song through The Sopranos.
Yeah.
Found that song and said things like, what's the song that Chris is listening to in the back room at the Bing after he has his fight with Adriana and he's just kind of sulking? And a great moment, Hesh turns around as he's walking through that office and says, now that's a hit.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a nice button on everything that had been discussed in that scene. And also it was a kind of a nice, sensitive moment for Christopher, who, I'll talk about this more later when we get to favorite moments, but I really enjoy Christopher in A Hit is a Hit, and I like the more sensitive side of that character, and that song really nicely underscores, of course, the obvious Nobody Loves Me But You as he thinks about his relationship with Adriana.
Well said. Paul?
Are we now at number 1?
We are at
We're
number
number
1.
one.
Bet your favorite music.
Number 1 with a bullet, 1967
That's
song
it.
by Cream called I Feel Free.
Oh, yeah.
That ends Isabella. I don't think... There are a couple of really good music cues in this season. I don't think any of the other ones touch it.
It's terrific.
For a number of reasons. One is what this episode has been about. As Chris pointed out, another perfectly chosen track to cover some of these scenes where Tony's lumbering around the Tiny Tears song. What then happens, of course, is that he's brought out of that funk by the attempted, quote, carjacking, unquote. What's the Winston Churchill quote? There's nothing as thrilling as being shot at without result. So here's Tony at the end of this episode. He's there. He's alive. And when I find out who took a shot at me, I'm going to feel even better. And then this beat comes in, boom, boom. And this great song with all these wonderful lyrics in it and great energy are now leading us into the last episode. But it is an emotional minefield that Tony is walking into. So that something in the combination of tension and energy and even ecstasy that is brought out by that song ending the penultimate episode, I just don't think can be beat.
Paul, you said that fucking perfectly, and all I'm going to add to it is Here, Here, because that's my number 1 music choice too.
Yeah, so it was also my number 1 music choice.
Wow.
So that's all 3 of us. The only thing I will add is that my runner-up or my honorable mention is Jefferson Airplane's White Rabbit.
You guys didn't bring out
White
Rabbit.
Yeah, that brings up
would
the
be my
flashback
favorite,
and Down
yeah.
Neck. But I do want to say the 1967 Cream song that is used there, I think, might be intentional because it is used to add flourish to a moment when he finds out who took a shot at him, And the 1967 song White Rabbit is in the flashback of Down Neck. It's almost like a subtext of like, it's your mother. It's your mother. Everything's in the past. It's your mother. Who took a shot at you? Livia did. She did it through someone else, but it's all lying there in the 1967 flashback that you used to take your pill, go back, White Rabbit.
Definitely a worthwhile moment to bring up. Guys, I just realized something.
What?
We did not do our top 3 songs.
Oh my god. Oh, well, all right. So,
Top
3
music.
music. We already
3
did the
music.
category, but we sing it now.
Yeah.
We did it already, and this is late.
Yeah.
Meow.
Oh God. Well, that's money, Paul. That meow. That's a hit.
That's a hit.
Now that's it.
It is a hit.
Suck on that, Richie Santini. I want to talk a little bit. We're gonna get back to the show. Obviously, that's why we're all here. But I want to talk a little bit about our podcast and our little family here.
This thing of ours.
This thing of ours. That's right. So, little bit of inside baseball for you folks listening out there. I'm a first-time podcaster. I'm an actor and a writer and storyteller and many other mediums, but...
He also has a beautiful singing voice.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's true.
Great. Now I'm going to have to demonstrate that at some point.
Nah, nobody wants to hear that.
Good. But I have to be honest, we had a friend of ours who is experienced with podcasting produce our podcast for the first couple episodes, and then he had to back out for various several reasons. And I thought, we recorded like the first 3 episodes all in one session. And I thought when he backed out, like, oh man, this is fucked, where I don't know what I'm doing. So I had to learn how to podcast by doing this podcast. And it's been a hell of an experience. It's been a lot of fun. Talk about our experience with the podcast, what you've enjoyed, what has been interesting or revelatory about it, your experiences being around it, Lily, and helping us behind the scenes. Some favorite memories specifically from our show. Anything you want to talk about in relation to our podcast, The Sopranos Podcast?
So I've been on a few podcasts, some of which have been mine, though I was never the editor. That's usually like my friend Mike or my buddy Evan or the few people that I've podcasted with. But I've been a guest on a few before. This is the one where I've really gotten the most in terms of like it's a podcast like I take around with me. Like I think like, oh, I want to make sure I mention that on the show, and I'll write that down. I think because there is a research component here, we tend to take things like pretty seriously, but I think it's fucking groovy how seriously we take it. Like you really want to deep dive into these analyses, and you want to think like, well, what is Paul going to think of this? Or, oh, Chris just mentioned that. I wonder if I can bring this up next episode. So it's become like a part of my life in that aspect. Also, we recorded those first 3 episodes. I was remote for those. Yeah. I was not in the same room as you guys, and I think our sound quality kind of suffered for that. And in going forward, I'm going to try to be here as much as possible, but because of like the rigors of the scheduling during the school year, I might not be able to be here for that. But I think we're going to go through that challenge together of trying to make sure that sound stays consistent, I think, throughout, right? And that might be something on my end, where I have to get the right equipment and stuff like that, because again, I know nothing. I'm totally new to this too in terms of my participation.
Well, I'm thrilled that we're going forward with this. Another thing, we didn't know for sure if this was going to be just a one-off celebration of 20 years since the debut of The Sopranos, or if we're going to actually, pull our dicks out here and do all 86 hours. But...
My dick is out right now. My nickname's 46 long.
Oh, God. 46 inches, centimeters? What are we talking about?
Let's not get into that.
But I hope neither.
Yeah, both bad. And to answer the home question, seriously average is the answer.
Well, with that out of the way, look, I think we're at least going to get into season 2, and I'm very excited. I'm thinking about some of the episodes coming up in season 2, and I'm excited to go over it with you guys. There's a lot of great shit in season 2.
Yeah.
And I think we're definitely at least going forward that far, but I'd like to, I think we, at this point, I feel very invested in this with you guys.
I'm super invested. This has also been like the time of my life during this whole quarantine business. Now, we started this show before the coronavirus quarantine, but this has been like the thing I've been looking forward to. We've been recording most of these in the summer, pretty bang on every other weekend, and just being here with you guys and Lily in your home has been so wonderful and so welcoming. And actually, let me say thank you on behalf of Paul and myself. Thank you for inviting us into your home in a time where a lot of people are kind of just isolating themselves totally. This has been just a wonderful thing to look forward to give hope, and to bring us together about great art and great people.
No, it's been a total pleasure for us too. It's what we look forward to as well.
It's the most normal, fun feeling thing that has gone on during the pandemic, at least as far as I'm concerned. So
yeah, I feel the same way. And then the last thing I'll say, I know I'm hogging the mic here. I am the least experienced with The Sopranos. I notice this all the time because we do, of course, a pre-recording session, and then we just stand around and talk afterwards. But Paul or Chris, like, you guys will mention something. Oh yeah, in season 5 when such and such and such. I do not have an encyclopedic knowledge of the show, certainly nowhere near the level of you guys, and it's actually been a wonderful experience to have that kind of, the role of like mentor and mentee with you guys, or just revisiting this piece of art that I think I did not invest as much as I should have on the first time because I was a kid, and to come back to that as an adult man in their middle 30s, this is blowing my mind. It really is.
Super fans of the show talk a lot about every time you come back to it. It's not only richer because the show has so many layers to it, but it's richer because your life experience changes. You see it through different eyeballs, and I imagine, like, I think we were talking about how Sopranos in your 30s is different than watching Sopranos in your 20s. And I'm sure, none of us here have kids, but I'm sure once we have children or families of our own, it'll hit on a completely different level going back a few years from now or 10 years from now and watching it again. Paul, what's your experience been on the show so far, and how do you feel about all this?
30 centimeters.
Oh, okay. So we're all going to go around and give our
like
penis
kinda,
sizes.
Yeah. I can't add too much because what Jordan said, it really communes with my experience. One thing is that The Sopranos is quite rich in terms of its text. It allows us to do this deep dive and you find new things. I think I might have mentioned this before, second only to experiencing it again for the first time, which isn't really possible, is being able to see it through somebody else's eyes. And so when I hear what you guys have to say on it, it's very rewarding. It's super interesting, and then it guides how I watch future episodes and deepens my appreciation. So it's a gift. I hope and pray that the audience has half as much fun listening as we do making it, because it's a joy. The other joy definitely has to do with the time frame in which we're recording a lot of this. Is a time when things have been very uncertain, and our lives as social animals during the pandemic has been diminished. And so to come here and have you guys open up your home, and also to reflect on one of our last topics, to eat together,
Yes.
and to have that travel feeling like, no, this is cool and we're safe here because we're with each other, is not only fun, but like turned out to feel very important and satisfying in a soulful way.
Yes.
So that's been my experience for this show, is that in some ways it's very simple and clear what we're doing and a lot of fun, and in other ways it's been life affirming in a way that I didn't expect it to be.
I agree.
Yeah, we made a wonderful Sunday dinner here. Most of the time we order, we're in North Jersey. There's a lot of great Italian places, specifically places that have awesome sandwiches, pizza, whatever. So, we do eat a lot, but we had one Sunday where we went all out and had like a Sopranos-style Sunday dinner. Multiple courses, pasta course, ensalada.
It was the social event of the season. It
Yeah,
really
it was
was.
very
Absolutely.
great. And, I think going forward, we want to have at least one of those every season when we record. But we put pictures up on our Instagram at the Sopranos Podcast. We are on social media, so you can follow us there. But yeah, it's been a hell of a journey. And I got to say, guys, too, like, this is going to... I feel almost like sick for how much I love this show. I love it more than perhaps I should. It's so good, and it's always the thing I go to when I have an example or want to compare high art against something. I always go back to The Sopranos in some way or another. I've had dreams of a 7th season where I'm doing nothing in the dream but watching a new season of The Sopranos, and I see it in my head, and I've woken up like, oh my god, I have episodes that don't exist in my head. That's how much I love this show. And to be able to share that love with you guys and to learn new things about it through you guys is like, it's food for me. It's like emotional food. And speaking of emotional food, there are many times throughout this podcast where we're talking about this stuff and I get emotional, not just because the drama is effective and the characters are rich, but I feel myself like welling up, like, oh man, this is so good, because we're touching not only on fundamental human truths in a time where everything feels like it's in flux and kind of shitty, but because it just brings up memories and feelings for me. One of my favorite moments recording the podcast was we almost like had to take a little pause for a second during our Down Neck episode when we were talking about ice cream. And we had a long conversation after we turned the mic off about, our having ice cream with our dads.
Yeah.
And how universal and emotional that is just in and of itself. And it's brought out a lot of fun moments like that where we, just feeling something new and something intense.
Absolutely. Well, actively trying to not get emotional here about it, but I think part of that is actually in The Sopranos itself, in my life. I think that the truth of it is, I'm academic, brainy type person, that I am not the son that I think my father really wanted to have. He's a kind of a auto mechanic type. He's really into cars. His friends are all tough guys. His friends are more like the people that are on the show, The Sopranos. And we he was a wonderful father, continues to be a wonderful father, but we have very few similar interests. Almost nothing overlaps. So I assume that when he listens to me speak, he's very bored, and sometimes he's, talking about things that I try to relate to, but I just can't. There's a disconnect. But watching The Sopranos together was something that we bonded over in my childhood, and this show, in many ways, has kind of given me that time with my father back, because now I tell him about the podcast that we're recording, and we can discuss specific episodes.
Being a more peripheral member of this podcast crew, if I may be so bold, I always love seeing my friends. We've all been friends for a very long time. And I just go live my life while you guys record. And I get to hear the pre and I get to hear the post. So I get like glimpses of where you're at. But I get such joy listening to the podcast each time it comes out to hear what happened while I was watching some probable garbage off on my own with our cat. And what else I love about the podcast, just speaking for myself as a listener, but having been friends with you guys for so long, I listen to this in the car on the way to work, and I find myself about to chime in as if you're in the car with me. And then I realize that you're not there, and I should probably, have some more coffee. And but it's such a joy. It's so right there. I feel like I'm right there with you guys, and so it's such a joy to have you guys come over every other weekend and get to see my pals and talk about a show that I've come to love more than probably any other show. So it's very special as a listener as well.
Oh, thank you, Lily.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We've been affectionately among ourselves calling this the Summer of Sopranos because it's been like, something to always look forward to. And while the summer, as we record this, is coming to an end, it's a beautiful day here in North Jersey. It's like, you walk outside and it's just that, there's a light breeze.
Yeah, no humidity. It's like one of those borderline September-ish days.
Yeah, it's just gorgeous. And what an amazing way to cap it off with you guys here doing this retrospective on this beautiful day in what has been a very weird but oddly fun experiment during this summer. And I just, before we progress here, I just want to thank you guys sincerely from the bottom of my heart. And I look forward to doing season 2 with you very soon.
Likewise. Thank you, Chris and Lily. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
Paul, you too.
Oh,
Thanks,
God.
guys.
Yeah, you guys are so good. And the feedback I've gotten from people, not just people we know, but people who've reached out, fans of the show. We have a pretty healthy listener base at this point. People have reached out and wrote wonderful comments on our iTunes reviews and sent messages and things. So this is great. And I love you guys. And this is awesome.
And thank you to the listeners who have been with us so far. If you've made it to the retrospective, that means you made it through an entire season with us. And I know a couple of people in our lives have actually started rewatching the show so they can listen to this podcast. So thank you all for sticking with us.
Seriously, I have put almost no advertising money into this show, and we have, I was kind of surprised. I was expecting some family and friends and maybe a few folks out there searching for Sopranos content would probably find us, but we have a pretty healthy listener base here, and I'm really thankful for all of you for joining us because you're a part of this conversation too, and I'm thrilled that we can kind of share and discuss this show with all of you. It's such a special piece for all of us for various reasons. And this has been an honor and a joy. So please stick with us. We got a lot more to go. With that said, I think it's time for another Top 3.
Top 3.
Hey, thank you all so much for joining us for this part 1 of 2 of our Season 1 retrospective. Please join us, same time, same place, wherever you get your podcasts from, every other Sunday afternoon for some Audio Sunday dinner with the Sopranos Podcast. We got a lot of great topics to cover for next time. We're going to talk about Chris and Adriana. We're going to talk about Tony and Carmela's marriage. We're going to talk about the guys, the mob guys, Big Pussy, Paulie Walnuts, and several more of our top 3 favorite lists, including characters and performances, moments, and episodes. It's going to be awesome. Lily joins us again, so please come back. You don't want to miss part 2 of our retrospective. And that's it. We'll see you next time. I'm Chris D'Amato. This is the Sopranos Podcast. Hit us up on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, The Sopranos Podcast. Thank you all so much.